6 weeks before D-Day, Nazi intelligence believed one American general would personally smash the Atlantic Wall. They tracked his movements, analyzed his habits, and feared his name more than any other. What they never discovered was this. At the very same moment, that general was one signature away from being sent home in disgrace, destroyed not by the enemy, but by his own words. In the spring of 1944, German intelligence officers in Paris and Berlin were obsessed with a single figure, Lieutenant General Thomas "Iron Jack" Harper. To the Abwehr, Harper was the embodiment of American aggression, loud, ruthless, unpredictable. If there was going to be a main invasion of Western Europe, they were certain he would lead it. Intercepted radio traffic, fake troop movements, and carefully planted rumors all seemed to point in one direction. Harper was being positioned for something enormous, and the Germans were right to be afraid. But while enemy analysts were mapping his every step, a very different crisis was unfolding behind closed doors in London. Just 42 days before the planned invasion of France, Supreme Allied Commander General Robert Hale sat alone in his office, staring at a typed order on his desk. It was already approved, already justified. All it needed was his signature. That signature would remove Harper from the European theater permanently. Back in Washington, senior officials were furious. Members of Congress demanded action. Newspapers called Harper a liability, a diplomatic disaster waiting to happen. The State Department warned that the damage might already be irreversible, especially with America's most sensitive ally. Then came the call from Army Chief of Staff General William Grant. His message was blunt and unmistakable. Fix this now, or we will. If Hale failed to act, Harper's career, and perhaps the Allied coalition itself, would be sacrificed without hesitation. The irony was staggering. At the precise moment the Germans feared Harper most, the Allies were preparing to erase him from the war. The incident no one was supposed to hear about the crisis began on April 22, 1944, in the quiet English town of Ashbourne, far from the front lines and even farther from Berlin. There were no tanks, no maps, no secret briefings, just tea. A small civic group calling itself the Friendship Circle had invited General Harper to attend the opening of a community hall. Its mission was simple: provide comfort and hospitality to American soldiers stationed nearby. Harper's staff urged caution. His reputation had not fully recovered from earlier controversies, and every public appearance carried risk. One careless sentence could end everything. Harper waved off their concerns. It was a private gathering, barely 50 people. Local volunteers, a few town officials, mostly women organizing relief drives. No microphones, no press, nothing official. Or so he was told. What Harper didn't know was that several reporters had quietly taken seats along the walls of the room. Whether invited by mistake or deliberately concealed, they were there, and they were listening. When Harper stood to speak, his tone was relaxed. Familiar. He spoke of shared sacrifice, common purpose, and the unbreakable bond between allies. Then he made a single remark, one sentence, that would ignite an international firestorm. A sentence that nearly changed the war. What Harper actually said remains disputed to this day. According to Harper himself, he spoke about the post-war world being guided by Britain, America, and the Eastern Allies together. He insisted, repeatedly, that no nation had been excluded. The reporters' notes told a different story. In their version, there was no mention of America's Eastern partner at all. The implication was stark and unmistakable. The future belonged to two powers, and one had been silently erased. The headlines hit Washington like a rolling barrage. By the next morning, newspapers from New York to San Francisco screamed the same accusation in different fonts. An American general predicts a world ruled by Washington and London, Russia erased from the future. The nuance was gone. Context was gone. Only the damage remained. On Capitol Hill, the reaction was instant and volcanic. Senators who had reluctantly shielded General Thomas "Iron Jack" Harper after earlier scandals now turned on him without hesitation. Men who once argued he was too valuable to lose suddenly called him reckless, undisciplined, and politically radioactive. One senator called him a walking diplomatic catastrophe. Another warned that Harper was actively sabotaging the war effort with his own ego. Demands poured in from every direction. Some called for a full congressional investigation. Others wanted Harper stripped of command and sent home in disgrace before the week was over. The War Department was flooded with telegrams and letters. The tone was unmistakable. The public was tired of scandals, tired of explanations. They wanted an end. Panic behind closed doors here. If Congress was furious, the State Department was terrified. Diplomats immediately saw the larger danger. This wasn't just about one general's reputation. It was about perception in Moscow. To Soviet eyes, this looked like proof of their darkest suspicions, that Britain and America intended to win the war together and dictate the peace without them. At that very moment, Soviet armies were bleeding themselves dry on the Eastern Front. Entire cities were being erased. Millions were dying. And now, it appeared that a senior American commander had publicly dismissed their role in shaping the world they were saving. The Grand Alliance, fragile, tense, and held together by necessity, was beginning to crack over a sentence spoken casually at a tea table in rural England. Eisenhower reaches the breaking point. At Allied headquarters, General Robert Hale felt something far deeper than anger. He was exhausted. For months, Hale had lived inside maps, tide tables, supply schedules, and invasion timetables. Every hour brought new decisions, new risks, new chances for catastrophe. The Normandy invasion demanded perfection, or at least the illusion of it. And now, once again, Harper was consuming time Hale simply did not have. He summoned his chief of staff, General Andrew Collins, to his office. Hale didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was cold, controlled, and unmistakably final. He said he was tired of defending Harper, tired of apologizing for him, tired of spending political capital on a man who refused to protect himself. Every scandal forced Hale to choose between military brilliance and political survival. Collins asked the obvious question, "What do you want to do?" Hale paused. Then he said something that chilled the room. He was seriously considering sending Harper back to the United States, for good. The cable that could end a career that night. Hale drafted a message to Washington. It was blunt, surgical, unemotional. He informed Army Chief of Staff General Daniel Crawford that he was prepared to relieve Harper of command immediately and put him on a transport home. He asked for guidance, but made it clear his patience was nearly gone. The cable crossed the Atlantic and landed on Crawford's desk before dawn. Crawford read it once, then again. He leaned back and stared at the ceiling. No one understood the contradiction better than he did. Crawford believed Harper was the most dangerous battlefield commander the Army possessed, in the best possible way. Fast, ruthless, relentless, an instrument designed for exploitation and destruction once the fighting began. But Crawford was also a political realist. The real question was no longer whether General Thomas "Iron Jack" Harper was brilliant. Everyone agreed on that. The question was whether his brilliance was worth the political wreckage left in its wake. From Washington, General Daniel Crawford made his position unmistakably clear. The final decision would belong to Supreme Commander Robert Hale alone. Whatever Hale chose, dismissal or retention, Crawford would defend it publicly, without hesitation. It was leadership in its cruelest form. Total authority. Total responsibility. No cover. Hale now stood alone between two disasters. Lose his most lethal battlefield commander, or lose the political trust that allowed him to command it all. While Washington debated, Berlin watched. As Allied leaders agonized, the German High Command watched events unfold with intense fascination. They knew one thing with certainty. Harper was in England. German intelligence had tracked him obsessively since January 1944. His movements, his visitors, even his public appearances were carefully logged. Within the OKW, Harper had become a fixation. To them, He was the most dangerous kind of enemy commander. Aggressive, fast, instinctive, and utterly unpredictable. His campaigns in North Africa and the Mediterranean had elevated him to near mythical status among German officers. His reputation preceded him like artillery fire. No one took him more seriously than Field Marshal Erich Adler, Germany's foremost defensive strategist. Adler had studied Harper's operations in detail, dissecting his movements, his timing, his relentless exploitation of weakness. Adler's conclusion was blunt. Harper was the finest practitioner of mobile warfare the Allies possessed, and German intelligence had reached its own decisive judgment. When the invasion came, Harper would lead it. The trap Eisenhower couldn't spring. Too soon. The Germans were convinced the main blow would fall at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest crossing from England, the most logical target, and at the center of that expected hammer stood Harper. What they didn't know was that Harper's command, the 1st United States Army Group, did not exist. FUSAG was a phantom. Inflatable tanks, dummy aircraft, fake headquarters, carefully scripted radio traffic. Entire divisions created on paper and airwaves alone. It was the most elaborate deception operation in military history, and Harper was its beating heart. As long as he remained visible in England, touring units, appearing in public, being Harper, German intelligence would believe the real invasion had not yet begun. If Hale removed him, if Harper vanished back across the Atlantic, the illusion might collapse overnight. The Germans could realize the truth. Normandy could be exposed. The entire invasion might fail before the first soldier even landed. A letter written without armor. Harper understood he was in deeper trouble than ever before. Worse even than the scandal that had nearly destroyed him months earlier. His aide brought him American newspapers. The coverage was merciless. The same writers who once hailed him as the embodiment of American fighting spirit now demanded his removal from the army altogether. They called him reckless, arrogant, obsolete. Alone in his quarters, Harper did something almost unimaginable for a man built on pride and certainty. He wrote a letter. Not a defense, not a threat. A plea. Gone was the general of profanity and bravado. Gone were the ivory-handled pistols and theatrical confidence. What remained was a man stripped to his purpose. He told Hale, plainly, urgently, that he had included America's Eastern ally in his remarks. He blamed the press for twisting his words. He reminded Hale that the event had been promised as off the record. But even as he wrote, Harper acknowledged a truth he could not escape. No one on Eisenhower's staff argued the reality any longer. Other generals were competent. Some were cautious. Some were methodical. None were Harper. General Mark Lewis was steady but hesitant, unwilling to gamble. General Jonathan Reed was precise but slow, measuring every step twice before moving once. Harper was something else entirely. A rare fusion of instinct and intellect, aggression and clarity. He was indispensable and unbearable. Summoned to judgment. In the first days of May 1944, Supreme Commander Robert Hale summoned Harper to headquarters. Harper knew what this meant. During the drive, he said almost nothing. He had already written letters to his wife, carefully explaining how his career might end. Not in battle, but in disgrace. He expected no mercy. At headquarters, Hale made him wait. Minutes stretched into something heavier. The silence was deliberate. Let him feel it. When Harper was finally admitted, Hale did not offer a chair. The message was unmistakable. The room felt airless. This was no longer a conversation between commanders. It was a reckoning. Stripped of armor, Harper stood at attention. Hale spoke slowly, his voice cold and controlled. He said Harper had demonstrated, repeatedly, a failure of judgment incompatible with permanent advancement. This wasn't just about the incident in Ashbourne. It was about a pattern. Years of brilliance, yes, but also years of recklessness, years of victories, and unnecessary fires to put out afterward. For the first time in the war, Harper felt something unfamiliar. Not fear of losing rank, not fear of disgrace, fear of disappointment. Seeing it in Hale's eyes cut deeper than any reprimand. One line he would never forget. Hale's warning left no ambiguity. If you commit one more indiscretion of speech or action, I will relieve you instantly. No discussion, no appeal, no second chance. Harper said nothing. Hale continued, calling Harper's behavior indefensible, a liability not just to himself, but to the entire Allied cause. His inability to control his public words threatened operations that involved millions of lives. Still, Harper remained silent. Then the tone changed. The reprieve Hale informed him that the relief order would not be executed, for now. Harper would remain in command of the deception force. He would continue serving as the visible spearhead that German intelligence feared. And if, only if, he maintained absolute discipline until the invasion began, he would receive command of the Third Army once Allied forces were established in France. But the margin for error was gone. One headline, one comment, one careless sentence, and Harper would be on a plane home within the hour. Erased from public view. The restrictions were absolute. No speeches, no interviews, no public appearances of any kind. If asked about allies, politics, or strategy, say nothing. If approached by reporters, leave immediately. Harper would become invisible, confined to headquarters, silenced, watching the war he longed to fight from behind a desk. These were not negotiations. They were orders. Harper accepted every condition without protest. There was no alternative. The blow that hurt the most but Hale was not finished. He told Harper something no formal reprimand could convey. Time and again, Hale had defended him. After scandals, after controversies, after moments that nearly destroyed trust at the highest levels. Each defense had cost Hale personally, politically. And still, Harper kept pushing the limits. Hale said he sometimes wondered whether Harper truly understood how close he had come to losing everything, his command, his legacy, his place in history. Harper did not respond. He couldn't, because for the first time, he did understand. Harper would disappear from public view, but not from German intelligence. As the invasion approached, enemy analysts became more convinced than ever that the real blow was still coming at Calais, and the silent general they feared most was about to play the most important role of his career, without firing a single shot. For the next 6 weeks, Thomas "Iron Jack" Harper lived like a predator behind bars. The war moved all around him, but never with him. He attended no ceremonies, spoke at no gatherings, gave nothing to the press. To the outside world, he seemed to fade. In private letters to his wife, Harper allowed his frustration to spill onto the page. He complained, he raged, he questioned fate itself. But every word stayed locked away. Outside his window, convoys rolled past without stopping. Aircraft roared overhead, bound for a war he could smell but not touch. Every engine, every departure, reminded him that the greatest battle of his life might happen without him. Preparing for a war he might never fight. Harper buried himself in preparation. He dissected maps of France until he could trace roads and rivers from memory alone. He drilled his staff relentlessly. Logistics, exploitation, rapid pursuit, contingency after contingency. He planned for success as if his command was already in motion, and he watched the calendar. Each day that passed was torture. Each day was also hope. One day closer to invasion, one day closer to redemption. Eventually the headlines moved on. The scandal faded. Other crises claimed the nation's attention. But Harper never forgot the truth. He was still on probation. One mistake, one sentence, and he would be finished. For perhaps the only sustained stretch of his entire career, Harper said nothing in public. It may have been his greatest discipline. D-Day without the general. Everyone expected June 6, 1944. The invasion finally began, and Harper was not there. While Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, Harper remained in England, still commanding an army that did not exist. He listened to radio transmissions crackle through static. He read cables describing chaos, courage, bloodshed. Men were fighting and dying on beaches he had memorized but was forbidden to see. On the day the world held its breath, Harper existed as a shadow. The most famous general in the Allied armies sat alone, fighting a war with maps and imagination. For a man who lived for motion and momentum, the waiting was agony. The deception holds, but the deception worked. German high command remained convinced Normandy was a feint. They waited for the real blow, Harper's blow, to fall at Calais. Their best armored divisions stayed frozen in place, engines idle, commanders scanning the channel for an invasion that would never come. Harper's reputation alone became a weapon. A ghost general, immobilizing entire enemy armies without firing a shot. Finally unleashed. For 2 more weeks, Harper remained trapped in England while the Allied beachhead expanded. Then, at last, the orders arrived. He would cross the channel. His army would soon be real. On August 1st, 1944, Third Army officially became operational. What followed was the most explosive chapter of Harper's career. As Operation Cobra shattered the German lines in Normandy, Harper surged through the breach with merciless speed. His columns poured forward, bypassing resistance, severing supply lines, collapsing entire sectors. This was the war he had been built for. Motion, exploitation, relentless pressure. The general who had been silenced, sidelined, and nearly erased was now unleashed. And Europe would never move the same way again. In just weeks, Harper's advance would become a legend, one that terrified German commanders and stunned Allied planners alike. But even as his army raced across France, the man who nearly lost everything would discover that victory carried its own price.